Hi, everyone. My name is Alex Ginsberg. I'm a second year at Columbia Business School, co-president of the Columbia Entrepreneurs Organization, and a founding partner of First Round Capital's Dorm Room Fund in New York City. I'm honored this morning to introduce the Dean of the Business School, Glenn Hubbard. Dean Hubbard's accomplishments are beyond mention, but to name a few, he is a highly influential economist and public intellectual, sits on the boards of 5 of the world's most important financial services firms, and is one of the most successful fundraisers in the history of higher education. Beyond that, Dean Hubbard both talks the talk and walks the walk on entrepreneurship. His class on entrepreneurial finance is distinctly insightful and highly popular. He has been an early-stage investor in a range of different ventures, and on a personal note, he has been extremely generous with his time and wisdom by guiding my independent study on entrepreneurial acquisitions. In the fall, Dean Hubbard said that his goal was to talk to 100 business students interested in entrepreneurship. The fact that there are 100 business school students at Columbia seriously interested in entrepreneurship is a result of his leadership, and I'm confident that he can double that goal next year. Please join me in welcoming Dean Hubbard.
Thanks very much, Alex. I know that I am a small sandwich between the very exciting presentation that you had from Shazi, who is just incredible, and this panel that you're about to hear. I just want to say a few things to you about the entrepreneurship community and the power of entrepreneurial ideas at Columbia. And I'd certainly like to begin by acknowledging and thanking Shazi. What she did in Happy Family and is doing in Happy Family really symbolizes what entrepreneurship is. It's about identifying an opportunity to solve a meaningful problem and marshaling the resources and people to execute on it. I'd also like to thank Alex Ginsberg, who is the co-president of CEO and the Columbia Entrepreneurs Organization, for helping organize this event. It's obviously a very big deal for all of us at Columbia. And I'd also like to thank Nick Crothwaite for his very critical role in this. I still remember the day he had this idea in the Dean's Advisory Board at the school, and I commend him and all the hard work. Emily Washkowitz is the VP of Conference for CEO. She's done a lot of great work in leading this conference. You may have also seen her recently in the Wall Street Journal in a great article about the startup lab that we have at the university. I just want to say a couple of things about entrepreneurship and why I think it means so much to the business school and to the entire university. The first of 3 aspirations I always say to students is to think like an entrepreneur. And it's not because I expect every student to start a business, it's because I don't know how you can be a good business person if you're not all about finding opportunity. I'm about to tell you something radical. I may not look like a radical standing up here, but and I don't have a reputation as a radical, but I'm about to tell you something radical. I think that's a teachable skill. A lot of what we are doing at Columbia is based on that teachable moment. It is about thinking that way, it is about learning to connect the dots, and about marshaling resources. This enterprise is also very important for our economy as a whole. You all know the old Schumpeter line about creative destruction and entrepreneurship. Far more important for what's going on is what I would call non-destructive creation. Ideas that people just hadn't even thought of. It's not a matter of just destroying the old, it's whole new things. That's what it's like being an entrepreneur. We've seen a huge interest in the business school and throughout the university in entrepreneurship among students. I'm very proud to be part of it in things like the IE program in the university, in the startup lab, and trying to bring Lean Launchpad throughout the university. You all know that for entrepreneurs to be successful, they have to have a team that draws from a diversity of viewpoints, and that is what a university community is. And some of the richest entrepreneurship experiences are actually bringing together the different schools of the university. I think this is Columbia's future, to be part of this scene, to lead this scene, and be present and active in it in New York. We also, of course, have had a long history of alumni entrepreneurs. And you're about to hear from this panel, but I just want to focus for a second on one of the participants on this panel, Alan Patricof, because he's a graduate of our school, class of 1957. He is the founder, the managing director of Graycroft, and a long-standing member of our school's board. He's a serial entrepreneur, and not only having founded Patricof and Company and Apex, but also dedicating a career to supporting and nurturing entrepreneurial businesses. And I can promise you he'd never produce one of those mean old term sheets that Shazi was talking about. Alan is a great guy and partner. He has helped build a number of very successful companies, including Office Depot, Apple, and Audible, among many others. He's extremely active in the entrepreneurship support team at TechnoServe, Trickle Up, Global Advisory Board of Endeavor, and many other activities. He's also, I'm proud to say, served the country in a very important role, one that he and I have talked about many times over the years, on the Millennium Challenge account, which is a transformation of American foreign aid to bring entrepreneurship to the world. So please join me in welcoming this outstanding panel.
Thanks for that.
Comment. That's very nice, Dean, of you to say this. But before you came, one of the previous deans spoke, and they had everybody stand up, and they said, those who did this, sit down. Those who did this, sit down. Those who did this. I found myself as one of about 3 people still standing. And she didn't ask those who provide finance for startups, please sit down.
So I guess I'll introduce myself. I'm Erin Griffith. I'm a writer for Fortune magazine. I've been covering private equity and venture capital and alternative assets for about 8 years. Most recently at a tech blog called Pando Daily. Prior to that, Reuters, Adweek, but now I'm at Fortune. We know about Alan now. David, I'll let you introduce yourself so everyone here knows your background too.
I am David Tisch. My resume is nothing like Alan's, but I have a couple of years to get there.
Just done a pretty good job, let me tell you.
I run a small fund in New York called Box Group. Box Group's an investor in about 120 companies in the mainly technology space. About 70% of those are in New York. We write a small check. We work with a variety of other venture capitalist firms, and we really position ourselves to be complementary. And what that allows us to do is really work with our entrepreneurs more than see ourselves as investors. And it's really a relationship with the entrepreneur long term. We're non-LP backed, and so we really don't have any affiliation towards any other people, if you will. And so we're able to make decisions ad hoc and really do what we think is best for the companies we work with. Prior to that, I started an accelerator program in New York called Techstars, which I ran for 2 years. Techstars incubated, while I was there, about 36 companies, and 34 of those went on to raise venture capital funding. I'm a graduate from NYU Law School and University of Pennsylvania, but I'm happy to be here. So thanks for having me.
Cool. Alan, was there anything in your bio that was left out that you'd like to highlight?
That was what?
Anything in your introduction that you'd like to highlight or draw attention to before we jump into it?
No, I don't think so.
Okay, cool.
I guess I will say one thing, though, that is relevant. I built a very big firm that started out in the venture capital business, managing $2.5 million in 1970, built it up to a point in 2005 when it was running $31 billion. And it had offices in 12 countries around the world. We had several hundred people working. But we had morphed from venture capital into really buyout, private equity, and we were doing very, very large-size deals. And so what I really did, which was to start Act Two, was in 2006, I started all over again and formed Greycroft, whose objective, its credo, is to be in the context of things, a small firm. And we started out with a $75 million fund. Our latest fund is $175 million. But it was really going back to my roots and do pure venture capital. So today I really have a firm that's totally dedicated by almost in legal agreements that we will never get big. And the tendency in the venture business is to morph as you go on to get bigger and bigger funds and more funds and everything. We're dedicated to the venture capital early stage business.
And that's definitely something I want to talk about a little bit later. So just before we get started, can I see a show of hands? Who here is an aspiring entrepreneur? And who is an aspiring investor? And you can be both if you want. Okay, so more on the entrepreneur side. the title of this is Now and Then, or Then and Now. So I guess I want to start by asking both of you, what sort of drew you to the venture capital world in both of your respective eras?
Yeah, I've always been a nerd, right? So at 14, I was hacking on AOL so I could get on for free and steal other people's passwords and things like that. And so sort of started young. And I went to Penn from 99 to 2003, and you saw when I entered the school this incredible energy around the internet industry and growth. And by the time I left, the notion of a non-engineer going into the internet industry was a silly idea. And so I think finding your way to this industry is something that's very hard, and I think it's a lot easier today, and there's natural paths, and schools are doing incredible work to allow students to have exposure to entrepreneurship and to sort of the startup world, if you will, and that I think extends well beyond tech. But I'm here because this is what I think about every day when I wake up. I have a passion for early stage companies. I get bored when our companies start making money or hiring a lot of people. That's somebody else's job, like Alan's. But you know, for me, it's.
I just told you I didn't. Did you listen to what I just
said? A couple
said?
employees you can handle, though. I check out. But I really do. I draw energy from other people taking an idea and bringing it to the world and going from that really early stage to, you know, a live company with customers and users. I just think it's a magical thing to see something start from nothing, and that's what I'm really passionate about.
Well, contrary or unlike David, I never was a nerd. Never.
I admire your I admire your saying that, because I feel like there's a lot of pressure in the tech world for people to be like, I'm just like you, I'm a nerd.
Yeah, I never even used Napster, I have to tell you. But I mean, David and I do share a lot. David, we got up here, said we're going to have a fight on stage. But I have really, truthfully admired David. I got to meet David when he was doing New York Tech Stars, and it was really, it wasn't that long ago. Was it 5 years ago? How long? 4 years ago. And that it was probably one of the first incubators, startup labs in the city, and it was pioneering in doing that. And David was really the energy behind it. I don't think without him it would have gotten off the ground and been as prosperous as it was. No, but I think you know, when I started out, when I left Columbia Business School, there virtually wasn't a word venture capital. So you know, I went into Wall Street, in effect, and that's where people did. I went to Wall Street. I went into the investment management business, but I think that, you know, I've demonstrated over my career, and particularly in starting Greycroft in 2006, that I really am very much turned on by young companies, people with ideas, and staying with them. Just the same things you're saying, and I do lose interest when they get to be too big and want to go back to the early stage. The ones I really identify, I think there's much more satisfaction in being involved with a young company that does something significant and that goes through all that early stage. When you get to be really a large-sized company, it has a different flavor to it. So I'd say that.
So what's changed the most dramatically? I mean, you both have started at very different points in the evolution of venture capital as an asset class. What's changed the most dramatically since you got started?
Well, I guess I'm in a better position to give that one answer.
Want to do the history of entrepreneurship? Right, go.
Just pinpoint one thing that you
but
think
actually,
it might be interesting to this crowd.
Except for the fact that it wasn't an industry. I mean, there was no venture capital association. It was a very, you know, people who invested in venture capital at those days, what we'd call, were really families, large families like the Rockefellers and the Whitneys and the Phippses, and a lot of the firms that were around there were firms and wealthy families who were putting money into young companies. But so it's an industry that's evolved and it's become an industry. I mean, now there are hundreds, if not thousands, of firms doing what we do. But a lot of them have morphed into much as they get bigger and bigger. Listen, the management fees are more, the money under management, the significance gets greater as you get bigger and bigger and have larger size funds. So I don't think, and you know, obviously there's much more technology involved today, and you know, with the internet, you have a whole new wave of communication that was not available in those days. All you had was a hardline telephone. You had a typewriter. You didn't have a computer. I mean, I don't want to put myself, you know, as a Neanderthal, but it was, you know, I was there when they started the first fax machine, you know, and now nobody wants to have a fax machine. But you know, it was the, you know, I remember when Xerox got started, which was.
I don't remember that. Yeah, I think actually what's more interesting to me is even from 2010 and 11 to today, I think we've seen an incredible shift in entrepreneurship. And the shift to me, if I look back at sort of 4 or 5 years ago, technology was this thing that was hot, it was hyped, it was coming, it was sort of still outside of the normal career paths. And if you were working on a startup and you told your normal friends, they would sort of roll their eyes and think you were just trying to emulate Facebook.
You're talking very specifically about New York, I feel like, because in the Valley.
No, I'm not talking only about New York. I think in the Valley you've seen even a similar explosion, just in terms of the variety of the types of startups. And that's where I'm going with this, is I think in 2010, 11, tech was still going to disrupt normal industries, and tech was coming to media, coming to fashion, coming to all these other industries. And I think fast forward literally 3-4 years, and what you see now is that technology is the only thing that every single company understands that their future is based on. And so if you are a traditional company in an industry, so whether it's a real estate leasing company or it's a company that manages oil rigs in the Gulf, or you're a fashion house in New York, or you're a media company, technology is the only thing that you're focused on in terms of how we're going to innovate our business. And I think that pendulum swung in such a short amount of time, where it went from a nice to have and okay, it's sort of our R&D labs thing, to this is the core focus, right? The New York Times today is a technology company. That's crazy. The New York Times is no longer focused on printing newspapers. They're focused on drawing users to their online or mobile properties. And I think you've seen that shift happen in such a short amount of time. And as an investor, you see that shift happening in so many different industries. So Warby Parker or Harry's, which is in no way thought of as a technology company, because of the internet, because of new distribution channels, have been able to disrupt an eyeglasses industry or an old stodgy razor industry. And I think that those are the things that in the past 3 years, the development in entrepreneurship and in technology have really unlocked.
Alan, would you say the shift of change has accelerated in the last decade?
Well, yeah, I think things are moving much faster, and obviously, as I said, the internet's had a big impact. David just mentioned the New York Times. It's funny that he should mention it, but we happen to specialize as a firm in helping our companies get business. Sounds very simple, but the biggest problem of young companies is not, we don't take directorships unless we're forced to. We always have partners. We don't care about the size of our investment. We want to help companies, and I think any company you speak to that we've invested in would tell you we are a large source of their revenues because we get them exposure. Because of my contacts and a lot of people in the firm, we spend our time getting them access to people they can't get access to. But the reason I mentioned this is that we do these digital media afternoons, and we bring our companies, get them exposure to companies. And we did one for the New York Times 2 days ago. And usually we get 5 or 6 or 7, the CMO, CDO, once in a while the CEO. We had over 100 people. I couldn't believe it. We sat in a room, was almost as big as, filled as much as this. And talking with Dave was saying that how they're all focused on new technologies, and how in every department of the whole of the New York Times, which has a lot of employees, by the way, it's that small, every segment of the paper was represented. They were all interested in new technologies.
I think that's interesting because you're talking about the services that you provide to your portfolio companies, and with the growth of venture capital as an asset class, as an industry itself, it's increasingly competitive. And the one way that firms try to differentiate from each other and try to get in the good deals is by offering services like this and saying, we can help you guys get business. Have you felt that like VCs become super competitive, that you've had to sort of step up your game on that front and market yourselves better to entrepreneurs?
I don't want to seem immodest, but honestly, competition is not of any concern to us. I think there may be deals we don't see, so I can't say. We may be competing with something that's invisible to us, but we don't get to a position where a company where that's not the nature of the business, where you'll offer $1 and someone else will offer $1.10. There's very little of that. I do think that the people in the firm and the chemistry and the personalities have something to do with it. And I think I've got a pretty good team of people. We've got 12 people here out in Los Angeles, and we've focused in 2 areas. Everybody who would have started a business when I did would have gone to Boston and San Francisco. I did New York. You know, I like to do things a little different. New York and Los Angeles, because we're interested in the media and we're interested in. We've focused only in digital media, and we only do things that relate to the internet or wireless.
I think the shift is super positive for entrepreneurs, right? I think if you go back to hard times in the financial world or the economy, you saw the pendulum be on the investor side, and investors could really squeeze entrepreneurs. I think what's happened in the past 10 years is really a shift to investors having to think about entrepreneurs as their customer. I think I'm in the customer service business. I have to service our entrepreneurs, and the only way to do that is to try to help. And the notion that I'm going to help build your company or figure out your solutions is a lie, right? And I think when an investor says, I'm the reason that this worked, or we started this, I think it's just a sort of a stretch and BS, right? And to me, if I look at what the VCs that we work with provide, it's 2 main things. It's introductions and pattern recognition. And so if you look at some of the firms like Andreessen Horowitz and Google Ventures and First Round, which are doing incredible work to provide services to their portfolio companies, what they're really doing is figuring out how to leverage those 2 things across a portfolio. And so if you actually just step back and look at the departments that they're building or the services that they're building, they're based around how do we streamline and create efficiency around making introductions, opening doors, and how do we streamline communication amongst our portfolio companies to help with pattern recognition. And I think that that's incredibly powerful to entrepreneurs, right? There's a lot of other things that are really beneficial, right? Blogging by VCs and sort of the open-sourced notion of how to raise money, right? There's in 2006, if you went online and tried to Google how do I raise money or how do I meet VCs or how do I structure my deal, there's no content that was free or available, and you were reading paywalled content from basically business schools or investment banks. And I think today what you have is you have a lot of investors who are putting free information out there. And as an entrepreneur, that gives you a tool set to really walk in and, as best as you can, put yourself on the same footing as an investor in those meetings. The challenge is an investor wakes up every day and does their job. An entrepreneur, this is your life, and this is your one shot to do something with your company, and it's a total mismatch of power, right? As an investor has a portfolio, they get to make numerous bets. They really do, at the end of the day, have a job, which is to give money back to the families that gave the investor money. And as an entrepreneur, and the woman up here before with an incredible story, right? That's life, and that's heart, and that's soul that you're pouring into a company. And so what you really do need is just gas to keep going, and you need somebody to support you and somebody to help you, and just try to lower the barrier to make it a little bit easier. And I think that you've seen the movement in favor of entrepreneurs from firms to allow that to happen, and that's nothing but a good thing.
I'd like to go back to what David just said. And this is really not disagreeing with him, but he mentioned 2 areas of helping get business. And I think a lot of people perhaps say they do it and they try to do it, and I think some of them are doing it. But the word pattern recognition, frankly, I'm surprised, and you didn't elucidate on that, but to me, pattern recognition is more something that venture capitalists have to be good at, which is recognizing what are the qualities that are going to make a successful investment. So we talk a lot about, in our own operations, of how good are we at pattern recognition rather than what our portfolio companies are doing in terms of that.
Yeah, I think that's total agreement, right? Is I have to get better at recognizing the entrepreneurs that are coming in front of me and my decision making. The challenge is in this industry, it's a 5 to 10 year results cycle. So I'm 4 years or 5 years into my fund, and I have no idea if I'm good, right? I'm not supposed to. Anything that's happened positive for me so far is an aberration. Right, we've had 18 exits in our portfolio. None of them have gotten to the stage where they're mature companies. They've all been bought previous to building scale. And so if I'm judging my results on that pattern recognition, I'm making a huge mistake. I'm trying to fund a company that's going to, IPO or build something incredible, and that takes a gestation period of 5 to 10 years. And so I'm going to get pattern recognition over time. You've had a couple cycles in you, I think, at this point, and so your pattern recognition is better than mine. But I think on the company side, right, we have 130 portfolio companies. The pattern recognition I'm talking about is at a given moment, we have about 10 companies in the market raising money. And so if we can extract some of the sort of, this is this month's sort of movement in the market, or this is the behavior we're seeing from this fund or this set of investors, and being able to translate that to the next company that goes out to the market in a very real-time way. Or this is the salaries for developers in New York. It's sort of the buzz was it's $80K to get a developer into your company, and that's shifted to about $120,000 to hire a computer scientist or an engineer into your company. That micro swing is monumental to a startup that's trying to recruit, and if you're undercutting a salary by $40,000, you're going to lose on every hire. And so that's a pattern recognition that if you can look at a portfolio and provide information to your companies and sort of help them navigate these repeat actions that every company needs to take, I think that's something that we take a lot of effort and try to provide to our companies.
I think it's good.
Alan, I want to ask you, so David was talking about the layer of services that are becoming very formalized at venture firms. Like Andreessen Horowitz has 60 people on its portfolio services team that are helping recruit, helping do marketing, helping do PR, all of this stuff, and they're kind of offering that as this extra service. First Round has this platform that they built that helps their portfolio companies connect to each other. Some firms are hiring journalists to just write about the companies. Have you?
You're looking for a job?
Yeah. I'm pretty happy with my job, actually. Alan, have you guys at Greycroft added any of these things, and why or why not?
We haven't, and I think part of it, you have to have a fairly large income base to be able to do something like that. I think the two firms you mentioned have done a very good job. As I say, we have focused in one area. I had breakfast with one of our successful investments just recently, and he talked about one of these companies, and he said, not necessarily those two, and said X company, which was a Silicon Valley company, has been great in helping us finding software engineers and helping us in the technology area. But 25% of my business has come through Greycroft connections. So again, I think it would be great if we could offer every one of these fields extra depth, but we have found that the one particular area that young companies have trouble in is getting access to decision makers. They get frustrated in how long the cycle takes, and they can run out of money, and a lot of things can happen in the process. So we try to accelerate that, and we find is a very effective tool.
Sticking with what you're good at. Got it. Did you have something to add there? Or?
Yeah, I'm a team of 4 people. It's myself, my partner Adam, and we have one principal. And we just brought on our 4th person, which is a full-time recruiter. And she joined us with the goal of not placing specific people into companies, but just sort of building a top of the funnel. So sourcing at the very early stage for technology hires. And is that going to impact our portfolio at large? Are we going to be able to help every one of our companies hire? Absolutely not. But I do think that there's these repeat challenges that entrepreneurs face, and one of them, which is incredibly important, is customer introductions, right? If you're going into a business where you need access to customers, advertisers, sponsors, partners, that's a vital thing. I think another one is tech PR. And you see a lot of companies right now paying PR agencies to get them articles in Fortune or TechCrunch.
Don't do that. Waste of money.
And they don't respond, right? And they get this PR cold email in their inbox, or they get this repeat email. And I think that's challenging. Where you see PR agencies incredibly helpful is in specific verticals, right? And so if you're a PR agency that can help somebody build a consumer story and really put their narrative out to the market, I think that's incredibly valuable. But what we try to do is just lower the things that entrepreneurs have to reinvent, and recruiting, customer introductions, M&A at the end of a company's life cycle, more in a downside scenario. Those are things that you see over and over and over. And so as an investor, if you can try to just provide some value there, and whether it's counsel, whether it's staff, or whether it's resources, I think that's a trend that should move, right? The notion that everyone is on their own island and has to repeat every lesson of an entrepreneur in the past, I think it's good, and you learn some determination, but there's some way to lower that barrier, and I think that's what you're seeing by these funds.
Let's talk about a couple other trends in the VC world, and whether or not they're a fad or the way of the future. And the one that I know that Alan has some strong opinions on, and I know that David has some firsthand experience with, is the rise of the accelerators. It's been kind of controversial. You know, there's Y Combinator has become really influential. There are a lot of other accelerator programs people will say are really low quality, or there's too many, it's oversaturated. You know, some of them have really bad track records, some of them have really great track records. As investors now, and David, as someone who's been inside an accelerator, do you have an opinion one way or the other? Do they add value? Are accelerators going to stick around? Are they going to fade away?
Yeah, go for it.
No, I have been somewhat outspoken recently, and probably this is the wrong group to talk to about this, but I was intrigued by Shazi's. I don't know the company, I never heard of it, but certainly you can't help but be impressed by her and the whole story of how the company's grown. And I was thinking to myself, first of all, we wouldn't have done this investment because it wasn't internet-based or using a mobile technology, but it was a differentiated product. It had a unique approach. It was not another Me Too company. I find that the biggest problem today in the accelerator, startup lab, et al., and there are thousands of startups. While you're sitting here in this audience, you are a microcosm of just what's happening in New York today. And that you can't, you know, if you look at a building of WeWorks, and I gather the Columbia Lab's going to be in a WeWorks building, there's 10 floors, and they've got 10 buildings in New York. 10 buildings, one group. And they're now in Brooklyn, and they're starting up in the Bronx, and that's just New York. So I think my concern about the startup craze is there's a lot of Me Too businesses and a lot of people who are not focusing at the outset of saying, do I have a differentiated product? Is it really needed? Am I just am I just bitten by the startup craze, and I've got to start something? And I think, you know, based on what I've seen, there is a lot of that now. Obviously, hopefully, within there is some wheat in the chaff, and that there are great companies being developed in these labs or out of the labs. David certainly has a lot of experience with the labs.
And would you encourage entrepreneurs to sort of exist, I guess, separately outside of a kind of scene where things kind of end up being repetitive and looking alike?
I think if you have a great product and you have a team and you have a vision and you have got your act, I think it's a great place to be because you're around people that have similar problems. You have someone to talk to at a stage where you probably have very few employees. So I think the camaraderie, there is some educational aspects in a lot of these, and I think that's a very positive reinforcement for those people who have great ideas.
Loaded question, but
that's the best kind of question.
Yeah, no, I think in general, right, the entrepreneurs who can look at anything external and utilize it as a weapon are in a much better place than entrepreneurs who look at anything external and use it as a tool or a lifesaver. And so I think accelerators can fit in that same model, right? And there's no doubting that Y Combinator and Techstars have provided incredible value to a lot of the companies that go through those programs. Does that extend to the long tail of the 500 accelerators in the country? Absolutely not, right? Just because someone hangs a sign on their door and says they're going to help your company doesn't mean you should give them equity. And that's 100% true, right? Somebody, you know, slaps on the word accelerator, they slap up a list of mentors who are going to show up and give you some advice, and in return, you pay them 10% of your company. I would I would hesitate. I would be very, very cautious, right? And the thing I would look for is a track record. And the other thing I would look for is the person who's running that program. Because at the end of the day, that's the person who's championing your startup. And so if you look at a program or anything that an investor, and I think you can look at it in the same lens, you're just a lot earlier when you're looking at the accelerator class, you really need to believe that you're going to get a lot more value than what you're giving up. And that's the trade-off that I don't think a lot of entrepreneurs do, because what they're looking for is help or a stamp of approval or somebody to tell them that they're good. And you're going to pay a lot for that. And I think the notion, and accelerators have done a very good job at this, the notion that an accelerator is free and just because you apply and you get in, that you should take the deal, I think that's nonsense, right? And you're paying a significant amount of your company to participate in programs. And if I'm going to anything that isn't a proven program with a track record, I would put it back on the program to give me a guarantee that I'm going to get the value of what I'm giving up to go into the program.
David, I'm not going to debate this because you really have a lot of knowledge, and so I'm really looking at it externally, and you've been internal. But first of all, my impression is that a lot of them are asking for 6%, not 10%.
The worse the program, the more they ask for, is what I've found.
Okay, that sounds. I'm not here to defend them, I have to tell you. But my impression is that 6%. Number one. Number two, my impression is that the trend has moved where they actually put up some money also. Number two.
Are you taking $20K for 6% of Greycroft?
No, but I'm just.
I'll do that deal right now.
Let me just finish. And my impression also is that they're giving him 4 months of space. So I think I say I'm not going to debate David because he's been on the inside of these, but I would say, and also in your credentials. Now this I will say, in your credentials, which were announced from the platform, that you were involved with Techstars, and 34 out of 36 companies under your aegis got money. Now he's very good, so that he'll tell you that's why that happened. But so they gave up 6%. They got 20 at that time, I think 25,000, not up. Now they get 100,000, and they got space, and they got camaraderie, and they got your inspiration. And I would say, honestly, I think though, and they ended up getting financed. I would say those companies I mean, we're talking about startup seeds, an idea, 2 people, maybe 1 person sitting at a desk. I think it does provide something.
I'm not debating the top sort of 2 programs, right? I think Y Combinator, Techstars provide real value. And I think what I'm saying is that there are 500 of these programs, and there are people who, in random cities, just because you're in some random city doesn't mean you should go to that random city's accelerator, right? Is giving up equity for office space, to me, is a bad trade. Giving up equity for access to a random list of people who are going to show up once and not really help your company is a bad trade. I think if you can find quality in the program and you could really see the depth of help that you're going to get from this program, I think it's a fair trade and it's going to really move a needle. But what you really need to make sure of is that you're not going to a dud and that they're just sort of siphoning equity from your company. Because if I'm an entrepreneur, and it's not an equity hoarding perspective, but I would be very cautious as to who I partner with. And in this industry, you have a lot of optionality. You have a lot of investors out there. You have a lot of programs. And I would just do my research, right? And I think that at the accelerator level, what you see sort of in the Me Too startups that you've been alluding to is the notion of I just want to get into any program, and I want anybody to tell me that I'm good enough to do this. And it's okay to need confidence, but I think it's an expensive confidence to get, and that's the point.
I would take David's advice and not mine, except I would just throw one thing in. It's a very lonely business, like being an artist. An artist that sits...
But you are funding people who are determined to create something from nothing, right? And every time that in that determination you're hedging it, you're probably also lowering the potential of that company. And so I think that that's the thing I look for most now than ever before because of the crowd is determination, right? There's probably going to be 30 of every one of these companies, right? Every idea you see, there's 30 of. And so there's a quality of the team, there's a quality of the execution plan, but there's also this sort of thing, right? And that thing is drive, that thing is energy, that thing is passion. It's the entrepreneur wakes up and this is what they're going to do and nothing's going to stop them. And I think that that's the trait that we look for in our companies. I think it's a trait you look for in yours. And so as you think about a group of companies all attacking this, it's the ones that are hedging their risk, I think are probably hedging their success as well.
I think you've heard all the factors that are involved. So if you're looking, because I'm serious. If you're thinking about it, between David and myself, you've heard the positives, the negatives, what you balance against, and I think you have to make your own decision.
Actually, that was probably one of the most eloquent conversations that I've heard about the topic in a long time. So I appreciate both of your insights on that. Let's talk about another sort of trend in financing, and that's the rise of the platform, crowdfunding, AngelList, Kickstarter, all of that. People are predicting like this is the end of seed investing. This is going to kill the early stage, and the other people are saying like I don't want to back as a VC. I don't want to follow on with someone who's raised on AngelList because they already have 5,000 investors.
Look, they're totally incredibly relevant question, right? To me. The challenge is that entrepreneurship in general gets all lumped into this one asset class, and I think that's a mistake. And so there's, to me, venture-backable companies, right? Alan funds companies that he needs to, at the end of the day, have a certain return from in order for his math to work. And there are companies that want to be billion-dollar companies, that want to be venture-backed, that want to grow really quick and attack really hard. There are companies that don't. And right now, what's missing in this entire industry is an investor class that funds companies that don't want to be billion-dollar companies, that want to build...
What do they want to do then?
They want to build a business, right? And they want to have a profitable business. That business may, over time, get to be very big, but the pace and the scale that they're going at isn't on the venture calendar. It's not on the venture timeline.
So those aren't really startups. Those are just companies.
Absolutely,
They're just
startups.
companies.
No, but
they're not like high
David,
growth.
I
That's a
disagree.
way
I
of
disagree with you.
definition.
People who put money into the platforms you're talking about have the investors, and I'm not one of them. But my impression is every one of them has the dream that I can put in 2, 3,
Right.
4, 5,000, and I am going to get $1 billion.
That's where I'm going,
company.
though. So that's exactly what I'm saying. So if I'm a random person investing $1,000 into some company that I've never met, that I read about on an online platform, thinking I have Facebook on my hands, it's a huge, huge mistake.
Yeah,
right?
but you heard Shazi say her first $500,000 came from people who gave her as little as $2,500.
But there's obviously stories in every category. My point is this, is that I think if you're going onto a crowdfunding platform as an investor thinking you're about to spot the next Facebook, you're making a mistake.
That I agree with.
And so what I would think is that, thank you.
So if you want to build the next
story next
Facebook,
time,
then don't raise on AngelList. Is that what you're saying?
No,
also?
absolutely not. I just think that the most interesting business opportunity to me is a crowdfunding platform that is looking at companies in a very different perspective than we're going to find the next Facebook. And so it's a crowdfunding platform that through either a revenue share or dividend business or anything other than sort of a long-term VC equity horizon is looking at funding companies to give them the ability to build a company. And that isn't necessarily a venture-backed company, and I think that's where the blend happens, is crowdfunding can be incredibly powerful to start businesses locally, to start businesses in verticals that just don't have a market size that is venture-backable. And I think that that's where you can see an incredible impact of crowdfunding. I think it's on this sort of VC side, again, right, you have quality crowdfunding platforms, and AngelList, to me, is at the top of the market, just like Y Combinator, Techstars are in accelerators, but there's a long tail. And if you're going on some random site to get some random set of money and thinking that this is going to be the magical answer to your company, that's a mistake to me. Now, at the same time, right, if you can't get money anywhere, money is the only thing that's going to keep you alive, and so you should continue to iterate through and find money, right? Entrepreneurs, in order to keep going, need to have money, and that's the CEO's job to get money, and if that means that you end up at sort of that asset class and raising from that style of investor, you should just understand what you're doing, and the notion that these $1,000 checks are going to be value add or impactful, I think would be a huge mistake.
Let me come. First of all, you say then and now, crowdfunding was not only not available years ago, but it was illegal. And so what we've had is the Jobs Act, which has made this possible, and legislation that has now enabled people to raise this kind of money with the mechanisms that are being raised. And one would argue that it's giving opportunity to a lot of people who probably wouldn't have access to capital, because not just New York people, but someone sitting in Keokuk, Iowa, wants to start something has the ability now to use one of these crowdfunding platforms. And so I think that's a positive. Is the loss ratio going to be extremely high? It's going to be extremely, extremely high. But people kind of feel I have a little bit of money, and I'd like to play in this same game that David Tisch does and Alan Patricof, and I don't have access, and maybe I'm going to pick something, and so they do this. Let me just finish what I was saying. I would say going back as recently as maybe even 15 years ago, but certainly 20 years ago, a venture capitalist would shy away from any company that had angel investors. If they looked at the cap table and saw, now I don't mean crowdfunding now, I'm talking about angels, which, maybe there might be 10 in a company, or there might be 5 or whatever, but not hundreds. But that someone had raised money from individuals first, a venture capital firm would say, I don't want to be part of that. I think today the ecosystem, again, it's going back to the question of then and now, I think today the angel, now we're not talking about crowdfunding now, we're talking about angel investors, who are for the most part entrepreneurs like David who've been successful and then take some of their own money and maybe some friends and put together a little group and they go into deals. The hardest money to get is the early stage money. The absolute hardest is your first money. That's why you hear about friends and family. I've been involved in the developing world and trying to bring some of the experience I've had to developing nations. And one of the organizations I'm involved with is called Trickle Up, and they give $100 grant to a woman primarily who wants to start a basket weaving operation in Uganda. And I've tried to tell them, they haven't really got it yet, that Trickle Up is the friends and family that doesn't exist in that world. They don't have friends and family who could give them even $1. You have to, put it in the right context. So I think that friends and family are extremely valuable in an early stage of a company. And then the next stage is I think if you can identify angels who will get involved with you at the very earliest stage. And crowdfunding is coming into that group and taking their share of the market. Does it compete with us? Absolutely not. Does it compete with David? Absolutely not. It provides some of these, the inventory that the good stuff will arise, and we will end up having some opportunities that come out of it.
As an investor, what's your impression? Do you guys have the impression that you won't touch that because the same way that people look at angel investment?
We funded stuff off of AngelList, and we've used some crowdfunding platforms to help some of our companies raise money. But picking up on what Alan said, right? I think that the key of crowdfunding, mostly, I don't know, whatever you want. No, I think crowdfunding, right, and angel investors and friends and family, what all of this new money flowing into entrepreneurship does is it unlocks diversity of the companies being funded. And instead of that sort of permission to start a company being locked in random offices on Sand Hill Road in California or in random places in New York in some stodgy VC office, I think that...
Put on a tie for this event.
But I think that that's really the key to me, right? Is access to capital means that there's going to be a bigger sort of variety and a more diverse set of companies being funded, and those companies can target different demographics or different markets than the VC community is focused on. And so access to capital to me is spreading out money to a more diverse set of entrepreneurs, and I think that is nothing but a good thing. And so wherever that capital is coming from, that's going to have a lasting impact on the venture industry. It's going to have a lasting impact on entrepreneurship.
But they've asked the question, Aaron, I think that's where you come from, that there have been articles about, is this new wave going to take away opportunities from the venture business? The opportunities are so enormous. I said to you earlier about, I don't worry 1 minute about competition. I'm sure I'm losing, but there's so many companies out there. All I want to do is make sure I see the best companies. Afterwards, we'll figure out how to get ourselves as an investor. I mean, we have a strategy that works, which is, we're not concerned with being the big dog. We don't care about being the lead. We don't care about being the largest investor. We just want to find the best companies that we can find a participation that works for us. And I think that the crowdfunding and angel well, of course, we all find things from AngelVine, but I think that all this is helping the ecosystem.
All right, I want to open it up for questions. If anyone has any from the audience, I can ask some more while you're thinking of your questions, or perhaps should you gather somewhere, or? Oh, okay. So I guess if you have a question, just raise your hand. Oh, okay, go over there.
I have a question about the impact of startups and the number of employees.
We got a mic.
Thank you. Recently, we've seen a lot of exits of like multi-billion dollars with only a handful of employees. You guys have the venture track of like getting the return, but how does all that apply to the broader economy? Where do you see companies that are actually going to impact the workforce and hiring and really create value to the economy, not to a set of VC investors or founders of a company?
First off, I would say don't believe everything you read in the newspaper, right? You get to read stories or watch movies about aberrations. Those are one-offs, and to try to repeat those or look at those for inspiration or look at somebody else's entrepreneur path and say, oh, I'm going to take the steps that they took, or I'm going to try to build a company the way they did, I just think is irrelevant at the end of the day. To your question, which I think is the meat of it, we're watching the economy shift in front of our eyes. I think that phones, the sort of broad finance world, the internationalization of access to information, these things are doing transformative things to the economy, and that's really the meat of your question. What's going to create jobs? I think it's every single piece of the economy is being sort of readjusted, and the jobs are going to come from different places than sort of before. And so the notion that there's new industries that are built that look like old ones, I think is a stretch. And so it's sort of reaching leaps and bounds to say that there's new types of resource allocation software that's going to impact jobs. And so whether that's platforms that allow you to freelance or allow you to consult at an ad hoc basis versus sort of a full-time job, those things are going to have impact. And I just don't think that we're at the point where that segment of the economy is developed enough to truly understand the impact. But the sort of Uberization of the economy in specific places, that's where the impact is going to be, right? And it's a college student graduating today isn't looking to be, and no offense to whoever sponsored this, but they're not looking to be an accountant, right? And they're not looking to be a broker or a middleman. They're looking to create a culture for themselves that they believe in. And I think that being able to control where and how you make money and sort of the way that you spend your time in order to do that is a powerful thing. And I think technology is both allowing for it and creating a lot of disruption in traditional industries.
He said Uberization. Just wanted to point that out.
I want to give bifurcate your question. First of all, I think that your question is well taken, is that, and there's a lot of people here and in Washington who are very concerned with the fact that what we're all involved with for the most part and what's happening in the wave of technologies going on does not have a very high multiplier effect in employment. And that is concern. I mean, although you do hear increasingly that manufacturing is being brought back on shore as the efficiencies and productivity is improving in this country, and the price rise and inflation and employment costs abroad are going up. So that's, I guess you'd say, a positive development for manufacturing, which does have a high employer effect. The second part, though, when you were referring to WhatsApp, which got sold for $19 billion, I can't emphasize too strongly what David said about don't be carried away by aberrations. Again, one of the things I say a lot whenever I make a talk is the number of venture-backed companies, and venture-backed companies is a fraction of the number of companies get started in a year, but there are about, I think it's 3,000 companies are venture-backed in a year. The number of companies that go public, the number of companies, when we started Graycroft at Heresy, in our original credo, it says we will invest on a basis where we accepting the assumption, the reality, that 98% of the companies that are venture-backed get sold, if they don't go out of business, get sold for under $100 million. Now, if you are investing and there are 3,000 companies, and 1 or 2 get sold for these, or 10 or 15, it's a very, very minor fraction. So we pride ourselves in investing with reality of expectations. That said, out of the first fund we had, which had 34 investments, I think 6 or 8 are going to be sold at a value over $100 million. So it's not that we don't want it, but we invested. It was in the paper last week. We invested in a company called Maker Studio, and I'm not promoting because we sold it to Disney. We put $6 million in over a period of 4 years, and it got sold for $500 million in cash and $400 million in contingencies. So we are very happy. But when we invested the $6 million, when we made our first investment, which is $1.5 million, we absolutely did it on the basis that our exit was going to be under $100 million. So that's the reality. So if you think there's an IPO in your future, forget it. It's going to be an aberration.
You're here
Dream
to deliver
big.
hope.
No, but I'm dare to be realistic in terms of how you finance your company, the realities, the economics, and what your expectations are. And listen, $100 million is terrific. I know a lot of our companies that got sold, the entrepreneur made a lot of money, and we did fine.
The nuance, though, I think is the most important thing, is how you finance your company, right? VC is a small fraction. It's not for everybody. And just because a VC doesn't want to back your business doesn't mean that, like, you're doing something wrong. It's a mismatch of expectations and asset class. And I would be very weary of that as an entrepreneur.
Now, back 15 years ago, everybody started a company with the expectation of going public. That was the norm.
Given that we're at a university, I have a somewhat unique question. What's your perspective when you look to make a venture investment in a company that was created on a campus, and that particular university has an equity position in the company and a right to ongoing royalty in future revenues?
Alan?
Wouldn't bother me. I don't care about A.
Well,
I mean,
let me
it's
give you-
terrific.
let me give you a part
If
B.
it helped the company, great.
Let me give you a part B. The ongoing royalty question I have is, let's say the company sells a piece of software, and once an acquiring company buys it, it bundles it into a broader package. And therefore, going into the future, it's very difficult to quantify how much of the ongoing sale is really due to that software. So I'm just
saying
curious.
if the university deal hinders the company going forward, if it's not structured the right way, that it takes into consideration future possibilities, because you're absolutely, I think you bring up a very good case. It looks great when they get 20% of or whatever the royalty, they get a 5%, 3%. If it sounds like nothing when they're at the early stage, but if it gets to be a real company, it can be very much a hindrance if they want to do a transaction.
Anything you do answer is anything you do to complicate the structure of these things just changes the chance or sort of percentage or limits the type of investors that you can get, right? And I'm going to value your company differently if there's any sort of gray hair on it, and that's any sort of promise of royalty, any weird cap table issues, any sort of equity that walked out the door, right? Everything that's sort of different is just another factor that I think investors look at.
I wanted to ask about the founders team, what you consider acceptable compensation for them, and what does that reflect about the pool available to take that risk, and if you consider it's a limitation or something of the sort?
Should founders pay themselves?
Oh, founders' compensation?
What, and the business plan, what you consider acceptable?
I mean, we don't pay that much attention to it. We're trying to back great people who have a really big vision, and we sort of look at it as life needs, right? And so we'll back founders who have a family, and their salary needs are very different than a founder who is young, right out of school, and doesn't need a specific amount of income to live and support a family. And so what we really do is expect that the founders at the very early stage are not taking excess amount of capital out of the business into their pocket. And so it's really, what is the lowest salary possible? That's what I'm expecting each founder to pay themselves.
You get a lot of points for being able, I'm not saying everyone can do, is using sweat equity as a contribution. It saves, remember, if if there are 3 or 4 or 5 people starting out and they can all afford to live for nothing, that avoids having dilution to a point of accomplishment where they can get a much higher valuation for the company. So in effect, they're converting ordinary income into capital gains in the long term. So to the extent you can do without or do a minimal amount of money, it reduces the amount of money, because most of the money that gets raised in these early stages are to provide for compensation, salaries to take care of the early stage people.
All right, I think we have time for one more question back there.
Hi. Do you offer an infrastructure of benefits? But I mean, saying like, do you aggregate things like healthcare and those sort of things, or is this simply a cash funding, or do you, in aggregate, as a running a portfolio of ventures, decide, well, it would be nice, if these people, didn't want to use the Affordable Care Act, or, there was other elements associated with.
Short answer is no.
Okay.
There's one more question we could.
Yeah, back there.
My question is related to your discussion about crowdfunding. I was wondering, I've heard a lot of talk, people saying about, well, VCs aren't going to back somebody later on who has so many investors at such small amounts. But if you raise those funds and say sell off 10% of the company and you sell common shares, how is that an issue when a VC comes in and they're investing and their money is turning into preferred shares? Because their preferred shares can subjugate the common shares. So what really is their issue?
If you're a great company, VCs will fund you.
Did everybody hear the question? Basically, it was kind of going back over the idea that some VCs are reticent to invest a company that's raised money through crowdfunding because of how many investors they have.
You're bringing up the reason why it shouldn't bother us.
Yeah, if you're a great company and you sort of just outperform any risks in your company structure, you're going to be able to get funded. Again, it sort of goes back to that other question, right? Any sort of flag that gives me an excuse, I'm just going to weigh what that is.
I think the answer specifically to your question is the concern that we would have, and I think anyone would, David would, is if you've gotten 1,000 people and you've got 1,000 shareholders through a crowdfunding mechanism, that's 1,000 people you have to be accounted to. 1,000 people have to get reports. 1,000 people just putting out your information to. It's very cumbersome. I can give you just a slight modification of that. In many of the companies we're in, at some point early on when they're starting to have some success, the founder will come to us, or we'll go to him, and either we'll say to him or he'll say to us, I'd like to take out some of the early angels that I had. In a case, he may have had 5, 10 people who gave these small amounts of money, who are really, they like liquidity, and he or she would like to reduce the complexity of the cap table.
Okay, great. Well, please join me in thanking Alan and David.